everyone, welcome to Painting Together. And I'm Gigi Chen and welcome to my studio in New York City. So I'm super excited. Where is everybody from here today? There's Florida. I saw somebody here was from Manitoba. Hi. I was just in Manitoba last year. Ohio. Wow, so this is great. So what I really want to do for this show is kind of create a beautiful little community here online, and I want to kind of have a little painting party with everyone. So I'm super excited. So today we are going to paint this flower. I love flowers and they are such a beautiful way to start this program. All right, so if you look down below, you're going to see that there are places that you can download some resources, like you're going to download the resources for this painting today, and also some how-to videos on how to transfer. And also, Artist Network has a acrylic painting guidebook that you can also download for free. It's called Acrylic Painting, Acrylic Painting Basics, and you can definitely just download that for free. So how do we feel about starting to paint together today? So I'm just gonna switch onto this camera, and here we go. So this is going to be our sample painting. So I'm gonna put this aside. And I'm going to see here that I have some paintbrushes. I have a lot of paintbrushes. You don't have to have as many, and you also don't have to have the same kind of brands that I have. I'm working here on a wood panel. I have some Trick paint here, and I also have some painting medium. And you don't really need to have all of this stuff, and you don't need to have all the same brands that I have. I also have some water. You have to have that. And please, I suggest having a rag to work along with, because you are going to make a mess. Acrylic painting isn't super messy, but I would really suggest that you have something to clean up with, just in case. So how's everybody doing? How's everybody feeling about painting today? So we have someone here from England. That's so cool. Belgium. Oh, it makes me wish I can start traveling again. How many of you guys have been to New York, this crazy city? So do you guys want to start painting? Yeah, we're going to start making some artwork. So I really want to start by talking about the very basics of acrylics, which is going to be, we really like to work from layers and layers and layers up. So the whole point of this particular exercise is I want to teach you guys the very basics of how to layer paintings from the very ground up, just like a flower. We're going to do things in layers, we're going to do things slowly, and I'm going to give you some tips as we go along. And if you guys have any questions, I'm going to be looking at the chat and interacting with you guys. And I'm going to talk about how we're going to build things up. And if you guys have any particular questions about techniques, please put it in caps so I can see it better, because I'm back here, I can see, and there's my friend Hallie. Hi, Hallie. And we're going to be doing everything like basically in steps. And if you guys have any weird questions, any questions at all, please stop me and ask, and I'll just look up and try to interact with you guys as much as possible. So, there's someone here from Poland. Oh, I'm so excited. Oh, someone was here for Christmas in New York. Christmas in New York is magical and amazing. So I have a palette here. So, my camera is kind of a little limited, but I do have, I have everything here that's put on your supply list that's down below in the description. So I'm going to start off by painting the background. And I really like to work from dark to light. So I also have here some Payne's gray. I'm going to mix in some Payne's gray, put in some Hooker's green, and I'm just going to start going. Let's just start going. Let's just start working. We're going to work fairly quickly. I'm going to sometimes dilute it with a little bit of water just to move it. Very important, guys, and this is what I teach lots of people who are just beginning. Do not glob on tons of paint. Acrylic paint, as much as I love it, dries really, really quickly, and then you're going to end up with like little mountains of paint all over the place. So I'm also going to put a little bit more water, kind of mix that in, and I'm just going to work as quickly as possible. So I love acrylic paint. I have actually only been using acrylic paint for about 5 years, And before that, I actually was trained as an oil painter. And I started doing acrylic painting because I really felt like I loved acrylic paint. I mean, I loved oil painting, but it didn't quite, you know, there's such a long legacy and history with oil painting. And I actually learned from working with artists for the last 20 years. And I didn't ever feel like I was good at it, but I wasn't like amazing with it. And I also really didn't, I don't know, sometimes you kind of work on something and you realize that maybe it's not your identity, you know? So I'm also gonna add a little bit of yellow ochre, okay? A little bit of yellow ochre. I'm gonna add it right here. So also you notice that I actually had a drawing transfer here. So there is so somebody's saying that the green isn't on the list. It does not matter what green I'm using. So I have very particular colors that I have on the list, but I also realize that maybe there are some things that maybe you don't have and that I don't have, right? So meaning that if you have like different brands, the brands are also gonna look really different. So I would really suggest that it doesn't really matter what green you use. I would even say that it doesn't even really matter what kind of yellows you use, because we're basically doing certain things like we're just painting a background. So I know that Hooker's green wasn't probably on the list, but you can kind of use any green at all. So if you want to take a minute and bring out that green, that's also cool. So I can just sort of work on using the Payne's gray and working on the background a little bit more. But I'm also picking up a little bit of the yellow ochre. Oh yeah, so I was actually, before I looked up and saw that there was a question, I have a drawing transfer that's here. So below in the show notes, you're gonna see a how-to video that I created with Artist Network showing you how you can transfer images really quickly and you don't have to think about it too much. But if you really want to, you can just freehand it. Oh, I don't use a lot of water. I use a tiny bit of water. So also that is also something to think about. You don't want to use a lot of water because you want to be able to create thin layers, but not too thin. And you also want the painting to see, I have used so much water here and it already is kind of globbing up, but it's okay. So I like to do my paintings in a way that is going to build up, right? So your first layer should not have a ton of paint, and then you're going to build it up layer by layer by layer. So I don't want you guys to super stress out about this first layer. I want you guys just to have fun, get to know the material, just loosely paint it all in, because we are basically gonna do, what we're doing right now is we're blocking in the painting. We're blocking it in. We're just putting one layer at a time, and then I'm going to do basically an overall working of the whole painting before we start reworking it. Like, don't start going into details. I don't want you guys jumping ahead and then starting to do details and then you end up having to paint it over again, you know? So that is a really, really important rule. So, you know, it's funny, I used to teach a lot of, I mostly have taught a lot of very beginner classes, you know, with people. And it's really interesting how everybody's first instinct, no matter what kind of paint it is, and I was mostly just using cheaper craft paint, how everybody just wanted to ambitiously paint all over the painting. And then about an hour in, they're like, oh, I can't keep painting on it because it's too wet. And I would say to them, very important, you can't be over ambitious, you know, painting, even if it's like a basic painting class, like everything all at once. You have to really take your time and build it layer by layer. And I would even say that with like a class, if say it lasts 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, like you really don't want to work it up and then like realize you have to paint it all over again, or it doesn't look good, or you can't change it as fast as you want. And I mean, and I like to think that the beautiful part of acrylic paint is that it dries really quickly. I know that some people don't like it because it dries really quickly, you know, but for me, I love it because there is kind of no way that you can, I mean, I'm not a very patient person. I want to paint. I want to make everything all the time as fast as I can, and I want to keep working the painting for hours and hours and hours. I'm also going to add a little bit of this ultramarine just to change up the background a little bit. And I really kind of just want to work through this background with you. You don't have to worry too much about what it looks like. So say right now, in about, I say in the first few things that we do together, it's gonna look like an ugly duckling, and that's totally okay. I think that, I actually really wanna know how many of you guys are super beginners, which are super, and how many of you guys have painted before with acrylics, and what have been your challenges with it, and what else you plan on wanting to do with it, you know, in the future, you know? And how many of you, for you, are like, this is your very first acrylic painting class? Actually, how many of you guys have never made art at all? Which I actually have taught many people who have never ever made art at all. Oh, somebody's asking about whether there's a proper way to gesso a panel. Also in layers. So if you guys want to talk a little bit about gessoing, gessoing is when you prime the canvas. Like, so I have here like a wood panel, right? And it was completely just a piece of wood. So I got some gesso and I put one layer at a time. I put about 3 layers down and then I sand it. I try to sand it down as smoothly as possible. And then I put another couple of layers and then I smooth it down as much as possible. And I generally use about a 220 grade sandpaper. And I mean, some people like to work on really rough surfaces. So you know what? You should sand it until you like really, you know, you feel like it works for you. I love canvas, but I don't really use it a lot, which is why most of these demos will be on wood panels. I'm gonna put a little bit of ultramarine right here. Put a little bit of ultramarine. Let's see. And a little bit more hooker's green or whatever green you have. I know, don't panic if it wasn't on the list. I compiled that list while I was developing some of the classes, but I didn't. I think I forgot to put it on the list, which makes me feel bad. Oh, hi, Suzanne. Hi, Suzanne. How are you doing? One of my friends from Canada. Oh, I love it. Okay, and we're just putting a little bit of ochre here. And there we go. Ooh. So I'm actually using a big flat brush. So I have a lot of different brands. As you know, this one looks very loved. I've had it for a long time. And I, you know, make sure to take care of my brushes as much as possible, even the cheaper ones, you know, because it's really important to keep all of your brushes in good shape, meaning that I really want you to wash all your brushes later. And also, when you're not using a brush, I want you to put it in your water so it doesn't dry out. And that's super, super important because it doesn't matter how cheap a brush is. Sometimes like you still can really love that brush that you're using. And this is one of my favorites. I don't even know what kind it is anymore because all the paint has worn out. And also I really want to remind you guys that, oh, and I also have a little cobalt. I'm gonna put a little cobalt here also. I also want to remind you guys that after the show, I really want to see what you guys do. You guys can post on artistnetwork.com, and I think that there's also a link down below where you can do that after the class or whenever, you know, because you might not be necessarily watching it live right now. But the resources will be there, and I really want to see what you guys do. Okay, so now we have our first ugly duckling layer of this acrylic paint down, okay? And as I said, for those of you guys who didn't use the transfer method, I hope you guys can kind of hang out and catch up. And I hope you guys, I also hope some of you guys freehanded it because I also really love that. Okay, so we're also going to, so I have my drawing down. And for any of you guys who have freehanded, you probably have like some outlines there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a thin layer of pink over the whole thing. So I'm going to take a little bit of this red. It has a very long name that I can't pronounce. I'm going to take this beautiful red, which is one of my favorites. It's a, let's see, it's a Quinacridone. I can't say it. I'm sorry, guys. It's a beautiful red. It's on the list. I'm going to use a little bit of this red and a little bit of the white, and I'm going to make it fairly pink. I'm gonna kind of tamp it down a little bit. I'm gonna add a little bit of water. Also, I have my rag. So I keep my rag on my lap because you guys don't wanna see this painting rag that I have. And I also keep it on my lap just because, just in case of accidents, you know? So I'm gonna thin it down a little bit with water. So just a little bit. I'm not using too much water. So actually, I'm gonna show you how much water I use. Just a tiny, tiny, I just sort of tap at it, you know? And then I kind of clean on the side. And then I'm gonna very thinly, so I can still see my drawing, I'm gonna very, very thinly coat this. And I'm gonna also add a little bit of medium. As I said, if you guys don't have medium, especially if you guys are starting out, a lot of people probably wouldn't have medium. It sort of helps thin out the paint without sort of diluting the integrity of it the way that water can. But I'm using a little bit of the medium. Also, depending on the kind of paint you have, if you're using, say, a more liquid acrylic, you probably don't need a lot of medium. I'm using a heavy body acrylic, so that I'm gonna need a little bit of medium. And also, guys, my palette is slanted. That is why my paint and my medium is sliding down the tray. So I know it looks kind of ugly, but maybe that's okay too. And I'm going to use a little bit of the medium. And I don't want to use too much medium. So medium also slows down the drying time a little bit. I'm also going to keep this yellow part of the flower open. So I'm not going to paint over that too much. I'm going to just thin everything down and see how kind of not pretty this is right now, right? And like, we need to embrace the fact that it's not very pretty right now, and it's okay. Like, I really hope that you guys aren't like just suddenly like, oh, I want to draw all the ridges of the painting. I want to draw all the ridges of the flower and see what happens right now. I want to finish it right away. Okay, but this lesson is to learn how to layer things, right? Can I use, someone's asking, can I use the cadmium free yellow light? Is it the same as the yellow one? I would say use whatever yellow that you want. I'm more concerned about you having this, you know, the yellow ochre, because you can put that underneath the yellow. We're gonna get to that. But yes, you can use either one, and you can also, I mean, we're also going to thin down the ochre and the cadmium with some white anyway. Yeah. Oh yeah, someone's talking about my my brushes. I have a lot of paint brushes, and a lot of them are faded. And it's not because, I mean, I use up a lot of them. Also, sometimes the paint on the brush just like falls off, you know, because I use them a lot. And that's good, because it means that I've kept the brushes in fairly good condition all this time, just not the handle. I mean, I suppose the other thing you guys can do is like just write on the handle if you want to remember what kind it was. But I don't know about you guys, but sometimes, I mean, artists all have a tendency to hoard materials, and I am no exception. Oh, what brand of medium do I use? I have golden. Let me see if I can take it out. This is the one that I'm using right now, and I'm using the matte kind, you see? I like the matte kind. It's a preference. Some people really like shiny paintings. I find that acrylic painting isn't generally super shiny, so I want to use the matte kind just because I really don't like shiny paintings, but some people really love making shiny paintings. Wait, no. Even when, say, somebody's asking here, blending colors is great, but never really satisfied with colors, because I always find that when finished, wondered it would have been better. Well, I mean, if you blend the color incorrectly, it's not a big deal. You could do it again, you know? And I mean, part of why we're doing layering is also to sort of like use the layering as a way to blending the colors. Okay, so someone's asking me about whether a medium is like glazing. I mean, you can use the medium to glaze. I know I do. There are some commercially, there's also kinds like, there's a kind called the retarder. There's a kind that's called a, there's also actual glazing medium. I'm trying to keep things really, really simple for this particular class. So I'm only using the medium, but I will also show you how to use the medium to glaze, you know? There is glazing, there's retarders. Retarders keep everything really super, super wet. And honestly, it's funny because since I used to mostly use oil painting full time. And since I switched to acrylic, really don't love the fact that a retarder can keep everything super wet, because I mean, the whole point of me switching over was to paint as fast as I could. I mean, so you can I think it's really good for you guys to go out and try out a little bit of everything to see what works for you. But I think for this particular class, I don't want to get way super bogged down in all these other materials. Also, I don't want this class to cost you guys a ton of money. You know, if you guys have a bunch of craft paint, great. Use craft paint, because I'm using a lot of mostly like primary colors anyway. They're just different tones. So I really want you guys to be able to feel like you can come to this class every week especially if you guys are already painting, already have things to use. Because I don't want this class to bog you guys down in that way. You know, like I really want to teach you guys fundamentals, and I don't want you to feel like, oh, this class is cost prohibitive because I'm asking you to buy all this stuff, you know? So even every single episode will have a separate list. So say if you dropped into a separate episode, you could buy what's there, or just kind of see what you have, and you're like, oh, I have a ton of yellow. I don't need to buy all of these other yellows, because a flower is a flower is a flower. You can change it up. It doesn't have to be necessarily like everything that's there. Okay, so ugly duckling phase, right? So I'm gonna clean this brush. I'm gonna put that in there. I'm gonna go back to my green brush, and I'm gonna rinse this off a little bit, and let's go over the background again. Because we're going over the most like boring part first. But I wanna get through the background because it's a pretty simple background, and I chose this painting because, first of all, I know that people love painting flowers, obviously. People love flowers. Who doesn't love flowers? But I also wanted to pick something that was visually accessible. And I also honestly really want to do something that I don't normally paint. I mean, what is the point of, I think that this class should also be a vehicle for me to learn along with you. And when I was doing the sample painting, I realized, wow, flowers are really difficult, you know? Flowers are hard. They're not, they always, a lot of art schools, we go back to the idea of, a lot of art lessons go back to the idea of painting flowers because, they're beautiful, but they're actually really difficult to paint. I actually created like a whole other sample, and I realized that class was going to take 3 to 4 hours, and I didn't want to torture you guys. So I picked something that I felt like was going to be a little bit simpler, but I could still teach you guys the fundamentals. So I'm just kind of going through, and in fact, you don't even have to use maybe even all these colors, but I really wanted to use a lot of these different colors just because I like to change up the way the background looks, Like I can make this whole thing green. I can make the whole thing green, but then it won't have any dimension, which is really the whole point of teaching you guys. So I'm also putting a little bit of Cobalt. I want you guys to be unafraid to play with this paint and just keep going. So I'm basically just going back and forth between the Hooker's Green, the Cobalt, and the Aquamarine. So, and here we go. Like I'm just sort of going through this painting as fast as I can, because I also see how this paint is still a little bit tacky, so I can kind of still blend. So I blend by sort of brushing on the surface. Like, here, let me see. Just sort of, I don't even touch it that much. Like I just sort of like touch on the surface. like you're dancing with it. And I'm sorry. So I'm just going back and forth. So you guys can do anything, any combination. You can even add some red to it if you want. So here, I'm adding a little bit of Cobalt just to kind of play around with these edges a little bit. And I'm kind of working the whole thing. And, in the end, I want to get this painting with you to a phase where I can say, okay, like this is pretty good. I don't want to go nuts because I also don't want to keep you guys here for the entire day. So, which is why also acrylic is so great to be teaching. because we can really blast through a class together, and hopefully in a couple hours you guys can learn something kind of awesome, you know? Okay, so how come we can use matte medium also as glue? Oh, well, matte medium is also sort of like, I think matte medium is actually a completely different animal. They're not even, I know people who used to use it to collage, and I think matte medium is actually different from, say, medium, but don't quote me on that. I think we need to look that up. So, I mean, I have never owned matte medium, but the people I do know who have used it, use it as a glue. And they're not using it to, you know, make paintings with. So, I don't know too much about it, but I do know that I don't use it, so I can't really tell you too much about it. Okay, here we go. Just gonna go through this a little bit. Oh, so I don't use that much medium. So Neha is asking me if I use a lot of medium. I don't use very much. As I said, the more medium you use, the slower it's gonna dry. And hey, that's fine. We're doing the background. You can use more medium, but also you see how this is already kind of streaky, and I just use water. If you use more medium, it's just you're not gonna be able to build up the layer fast enough. And I actually don't even use a lot of medium for the first few layers of any of my paintings, you know, because I want to get through. So the whole idea of layering is that you want to get through the first layer really quickly. You don't want to be sitting around fussing about whether or not something, see this part here, you can already see that because the paint's really wet, it's already streaking, and maybe that part was already still wet. And you want to avoid that as much as possible. I don't know if you can see that. You can avoid that as much as possible, you know? But that is why we're layering, and that's why we're also just working on the background. So I'm just going to use a little bit of black and cover that up, and hopefully I'll go back to it. If not, it's okay too. Let's see, is there anyone asking me something? Let's see, yeah, so just the medium question. I mean, I don't think that you need to go nuts. Just as I would even say that if you don't have medium, you might not even need it for this class. You know, I would just suggest some water and making sure you're very gingerly about how much water you use. Okay, I'm gonna put a little bit of more cobalt down here. And you know, you see me, I'm kind of just willy-nilly going through these colors because I want to get through this background. It's funny, I've been painting in acrylics for about 5 years, and I taught myself acrylics after I decided that I wanted to change up from using oil paint. And you know, oil paint is a completely different animal, I have to say. There are a lot of things that are really similar, like say color mixing is about the same, you know? I would say that, I mean, colors are colors when it comes to painting. You know that if you know, like those basic fundamentals, picking, like if you put together red and yellow, it'll turn orange, right? So sure, those things come in handy. And there are some painting techniques like layering that also come in really handy. But the truth is, I found that they're really different. I was really surprised. Like I have been working with painting and oil paint for, I would say, for a really long time, for almost 20 years. And when I went into acrylics, I thought, great, here's something that's gonna be faster. I'm gonna learn, it's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna be so good at it. And I was amazed by how different they were. I love that there's not a lot of chemicals. I love that I don't have to clean all this stuff with turpentine, because I was actually starting to develop an allergy to turpentine. I love that I don't have to clean everything with solvents. I love that my studio no longer smelled really badly, you know? And I love that I didn't have to constantly turn on like a fan in order to work, which was already like a lot, you know? So yeah, I mean, I found that what it is with acrylic is that they dry really quickly. So you want to push the paint around, but there's not always an opportunity, you know? Like there are some colors that dry slower. Like obviously you guys will probably notice that if you leave your white on your palette for a really long time, it might not dry, you know? So That's also a good thing. But I mean, the thing is, you also kind of get to know what brands work for you, and then you start getting to know like how they work for you anyway, right? There are some brands that dry slower. I know that there are certain brands that create a slower drying kind of paint. And I know that, I mean, but for the most part, heavy body paint dries fairly quickly. See, like this is all pretty much dry, you know, and it's okay. And if it's a little streaky, it's okay right now. Yeah, and I found that when I was layering with it, I really had to think almost in terms of watercolors, you know, when I was first learning how to layer them. And that was also my first instinct because I also did watercolors for a really long time. I wasn't a very good watercolor painter, but I definitely felt like there are certain principles I can bring back. I would say that acrylic almost is right in between in a lot of ways. But it really depends on what you want. I mean, I know lots of artists who really want to create like those kind of soft effects, and I really feel like you can create really soft effects with acrylic. You just really have to, you know, figure it out. Oh yeah, someone's asking me if I worked much with watercolor. I did. I actually used them for most of my 20s, and I honestly didn't become very good at it. That is something, I mean, like anything else, you really have to keep working on it in order to get really good. And I wasn't patient enough to do watercolors, even though, I mean, because that really is building up layers and building up layers. And I know people who are so good at it. So I'm just getting out my brushes. I like so many brushes. I know some people who are amazing at it. I unfortunately never became amazing at it. I actually just did a lot of, what I actually tended to do was I did a lot of mixed media. Okay, so I did a lot of mixed media and I would draw over the watercolors with colored pencil. Okay, so now we're gonna go right into starting the tones of the flower. And then like right now, see the background's gonna be a little bit of a little messy right now because it's still in like beginner phases. So I might wanna go into it a third time. So I'm going to take a little bit of this umber and mix a little bit of this red, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to sort of trace where the drawing was. And I really like to work from dark to light. So right now what I'm doing is I'm creating a guide for myself because I sort of lost some of my drawing and I just want to get some of it back. I also want to put in a little bit of Payne's Gray into this, and I kind of love Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray has actually become my favorite paint. Oh, is that not Payne's Gray? Did I not put down Payne's Gray? Hold on, let me see. I'm checking that out. That looks like it's black. Let me go get my Payne's Gray. Let's see. Okay, I'm gonna put my Payne's Gray right here. So as you can kind of see that my palette's a little bit, you know, off to the side, and I have more palette on this side. So if you don't see me working over there, don't panic. Just ask me what I'm doing, and I'll walk you through it. I'm gonna take a little bit of this Payne's Gray, and put a little bit of it with the red. So, you know, I wasn't taught how to paint in a really traditional way. I know there are some people who have very orderly palettes. As you see, I do not have an orderly palette. I'm more sort of working, I don't like to think, you know, painting is also really complex. I really don't like the idea of being bogged down by things like that. I know there are some people who really love it. I am not one of those people. I don't have an orderly palette. My studio is kind of a mess a lot of the time, you know. I don't always know. I mean, I think that for me the priority has not been to like keep like a very like crazy palette. Okay, so I'm going to just draw out some of these ridges. And so this is just a little bit of Payne's Gray with this red. And I'm going to put a little bit of umber, and I'm going to just fill in some of these darks. And see, it's a slow up building. We're still in ugly duckling phase, and we might be for another half hour, so don't worry. we go. Now, how many of you guys have never worked with acrylic before? Like, I want to know about that. And also, remember, guys, it would be really nice if you wrote any questions or answers to my questions in boldface, or I'm sorry, in caps, so I can see it, because I'm trying to look at everything at the same time. So, okay, so we're just going to outline. So I'm kind of going back and forth between using some of the Umber, using some of this funny little mix I made with the Payne's gray and the red, and we're just gonna put down tones. You know what's funny? So when I was working on the sample painting, I think I was about halfway in and I thought, wow, this painting is really, really ugly. Like, what? And you know what's funny? I think that way about every painting that I make. And I always forget that, you know? Oh, so I'm using a pretty small round brush. I think it's a number 6. And as I said, you can kind of use any kind of brush, really, whatever. Sometimes I like to use a really flat brush and just use like the sides of it and paint. And maybe you'll also see me doing that. I mean, I would say that sometimes I love getting cheap brushes from like a craft store, you know? Like, I actually kind of, like, my secret love is just to kind of go to a craft store and get those packs that have like 50 brushes in them, even though in the end I end up with like tons and tons of like brushes I'll never use. I'm sort of really excited to get them. I mean, something about acquiring art supplies that way that are super cheap that you can kind of use. And you know, some of them aren't so bad. I have to say, I have a lot of craft brushes that I really love. Let's see. Somebody said, Neha said she's only painted once. So now I'm really excited to see what everyone does after this class. So there are about 3 big petals that are up here. So I'm just gonna outline that. There we go. I'm gonna try to go as fast as I can. And I really want you guys to kind of see this as like a form of meditation, you know, like one stroke at a time meditation. Okay. Let's see. Go. And also remember that Artist Network has that free acrylic resource for you guys, so you guys can see all of that down below in the show notes. Okay, I'm going to use a little bit of medium. Sometimes if the medium is in front of me, I'll use it, even if there's no rhyme or reason for it. Like sometimes I use whatever's like directly in front of me, and that actually kind of makes for a more interesting painting. That's why I'm not having you guys straight up use a lot of black. Actually, it's funny, I was actually considering not putting black on the list at all, because I found that with this painting, I am always just using the Payne's gray, you know, and I was like, oh, I could have saved you guys a little bit of money by not putting it there. So, okay, so I'm doing the under part of this, and I'm gonna use some Payne's gray and this red, and I'm just going to put back some of these. Okay. Does it matter? You know, somebody's asking me whether or not the brushes are first or medium. Like, I know that when you go into the art store, it says acrylic brushes, oil brushes, watercolor brushes. I personally don't care. I mean, I really like to use really soft brushes, as you see. Like, I don't use a lot of bristle brushes. You know, I actually have a lot of brushes from everywhere, and once you get them home, you kind of don't even know what they're for, because I don't think most brushes are labeled. I like using these like soft brushes, you know, that have a tiny, like just a little bit of give, not too much, like not just stiff enough. I would say you guys should just try out whatever works for you. I don't think it matters, but that's me, because as I said, once you get them home, I don't even know if you even, I mean, I don't think most brushes are even, I mean, this brush is not even labeled with what it was for to begin with. Like, I mean, they can probably rearrange the entire art store and you guys would never know the difference. you know. Okay. Oh yeah, and I know that somebody here is like, oh, they're just getting here, but you know what? This video is available later, after this live stream. So you guys can always go back and see what we're doing later. And also, even including all of you guys who are sitting with me right now, you guys can go back and especially because I don't know if a lot of you are painting super, super fast, you know? Like I'm trying to go as fast as I can just to, you know, so I don't keep you guys here all day. Okay, so here we are, there's this, and now I'm gonna start thinking about putting down the next layer of tones. All right, so I'm gonna go back to my slightly bigger brush. I'm gonna clean it off. Let's see. I'm gonna try to limit my brush use, but I can't promise you that. So I'm gonna feel, so there's already this like mixture. I have a mixture of this red and the Payne's gray. I'm gonna add a little bit of white to it, okay? I'm gonna add a little bit of white, and it's gonna make this almost sort of lilac-y color. And I'm actually wondering if I should switch brushes. Okay, all right. So as I said, my palette doesn't completely fit on the screen. I'm gonna try to stay within the place, but I think you guys can kind of get what I'm doing, hopefully. Let's see. Okay, yeah, it would be nice if you use caps too, if you had questions for me. So I'm gonna go right in and start, so see how I have those ridges? I'm gonna start painting within these ridges. You see how I'm also leaving a little bit after these ridges because I wanna keep that light. Because I don't want to be fighting the color later. So I'm just using the side of this brush. Like, see this? This is like a big filbert brush. I'm using the side of it. You could also use a round. You could also use something much smaller, but I'm a professional, guys. You know, I'm going to use what I have in front of me. I don't want to be rooting around all of my stuff. So I'm going to just keep painting. See. So still an ugly duckling phase, guys. All right, I'm going to kind of just see. See this paint right now? It's not super thick because, as I said, we're building this painting from layers up. Like we're not like, I really hope a lot of you guys aren't like globbing a ton of paint down because then you won't be able to move it. But that is, I mean, the whole lesson of this is to go one layer at a time, and you'll be really surprised at how few layers actually you need to get something that looks fairly dimensional. So I'm still, and I'm personally referring to my reference painting. I'm actually mostly painting from my painting and not from the photograph. But I hope you guys have downloaded from the resources down there, and you have downloaded the photograph, which I pulled from a open resource photo page called Unsplash, and they're awesome. I love them. So where you can like also look up the photographer, hopefully, and download the image that I actually pre-sized. So I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm using an 8x10. I'm using an 8, but if any of you guys have free-handed this, great. I hope you guys are making giant paintings in your home right now. I mean, I wish I could be doing giant paintings for this too. And if any of you guys are making giant paintings, I really want you to tell me. So I'm being careful to leave some of this a little lighter. I'm gonna not do too much here yet, but I'm gonna start just doing some of this. Let's see. We're just still using this mix, and I'm also putting a little bit of medium in this, but you don't have to, just to kind of make it a little less streaky. I'm gonna keep that a little light, and that's okay. So I know a lot of, it's funny, whenever I see a lot of paintings, I kind of think, when I used to be in art school, so I didn't go to school for painting. I actually used to go to school for traditional animation, and then I sort of fell into this. So when I was actually first starting to work with artists, they would always tell me that like Lair's paintings are all built up from the ground up. Like if you go and see an old master, like a Da Vinci, Da Vinci painted his paintings one layer at a time too, and he obsessively did it. It was like forever. And so that's why I really want to really push the idea that like paintings are built up and not just sort of like put together, Like even if you're doing abstract work, and I have done some abstract work before, you're still layering paintings, Oh, so this someone's asking me, do you ever start with an underpainting? We are literally creating an underpainting right now. This is literally the underpainting. This is the ugly duckling phase is literally the underpainting. So we are building it up. So if we're building it up from the underpainting. So right now it doesn't look like much. It's kind of really ugly, And I have to say, I never get over how ugly a painting is when you first start it. And sometimes when I'm painting alone in my studio, I think, wow, even the greats had really ugly underpaintings, right? Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy to think about someone like Da Vinci having like a really ugly underpainting for his like gorgeous paintings? The whole point of why I want this to be our lesson, and which honestly, layering is always going to be our lesson. Layering is always going to be part of our lesson. Like, I really just wanted to push the idea of like, an underpainting is an underpainting. You have to paint it again in order to really fully get the effects of what you're trying to do. So here we go. I'm going to mix a little bit more paint. I never mix enough paint. I'm going to put the red and the Payne's gray together, add some white, mix it together. I might switch up my brush. What do you think about that, guys? I'll switch up my brush a little bit. I'm gonna switch off to something a little smaller, another like small filbert. Oh yeah, so since I'm kind of doing this, it's because I haven't painted any of this yet. I'm going to go right in and put a layer of ochre and a little layer, and I'm gonna mix a tiny bit of this burnt umber. Okay, and I'm going to just do this. I'm just gonna fill it in. I'm basically gonna use my eye to kind of like fix a lot of this anyway, so don't worry about that. I did the drawing. So, when I have this little video on how you can directly transfer from a photograph and make it into a drawing onto your picture, but something that I really want to say is that even if you have freehanded, like you're gonna change it. It's really just a guide. Like you see, I've lost pretty much the whole drawing. Yeah. Oh, someone asked me if I ever animated. So I have a degree in traditional animation. I wanted to work for Disney when I was a kid, so I thought, great, I'm gonna go to animation school. I'm gonna go to animation school and I'm gonna like work for Disney. I graduated from college in 2004 in New York City. And 2004 was when everything was, so this is a filbert brush, sorry. 2004, everything was about to go digital in the next couple of years, and I was really good at computers, but I really didn't like the idea of sitting in front of a computer for my entire life, Like, obviously, I'm watching you guys on a computer right now. It's when we're talking to each other, but I didn't want to sit in an office and paint. Not paint. And I love painting. And by some weird coincidence, when I was a teenager, I met a fine artist. She was amazing. Her name is Kathleen Gillia. You can look her up, Gilje. She's amazing. And I started working with her when I just turned 19 years old. So I was still in college. I was a freshman. And I don't know if Kathy or her family is watching right now, but hello. But meeting her changed. She is an amazing oil painter, and she brought me into her art studio, and she said she needed an assistant. I started working for her, and I always knew in my heart that I wanted to be a painter. And when I met her, I realized that, it's totally possible in this century that a woman, and not just that, but like we can all become just like what we want, right? And when I was, okay, as I'm talking, I'm gonna also work with you. I'm putting a little bit of this red and this white and also this like funny purple and kind of mixing it in. It's gonna be very light lilac. And I'm just gonna start putting in some of these whites and blocking them out. So I never ended up working in the industry. I left college in 2004 and I was working for this painter and another painter, and I really preferred the business and the life of being a painter. And my parents didn't like that too much, but that's okay, you know. I just felt like in my heart when I first met these artists that, oh, they're living that life that I've always wanted to live. Like, I think I'd always been painting anyway. And since I had always been painting anyway, I knew in my heart that that was actually really what I wanted to do. So right now we're just gonna put in these lights. But you know, I mean, that really says a lot, right? I think it's a scary life and it can be kind of strange, but I didn't end up in the animation business. And honestly, I love animators. A lot of my friends are animators. A lot of my friends from college stayed in the business and they're doing amazing and they're producing these amazing TV shows. Oh my God, I'm so happy that they wanted to stay because it is a really fun business. If you really love it, you really have to love it. You really, really have to love it. I mean, going digital or staying in traditional, you really have to love the thing that you're doing. I mean, if you're gonna be doing something creative, we only hope that we stay and do the thing that we really want that's creative. Like some people go into these big businesses and they don't stay in it, you know, or they realize it's not really their thing. Like I never even end up having a job as an animator, but I still use a lot of those skills. I still bring a lot of those ideas like storytelling and composition into the work that I do. So I'm just basically blocking in the lights. So I made this like funny little purple color. And yes, someone's asking me if I like saw Bob Ross when I was a kid. Guys, Bob Ross was my idol as a girl. I watched him every day. I think he's the reason why I became a painter. You know, like when I was a kid, I didn't know that that's what I wanted to do, but I certainly knew that it was so exciting. I mean, I only kind of hope, like my friends were all joking when I said, oh, I'm going to host this like live painting class for Artist Network, and everyone said, you're going to live out your Bob Ross dreams. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to live out my Bob Ross dreams. I think we should all live out our Bob Ross dreams and paint happy things and have a good time like doing this, you know? I am not as good as him, I don't think, in terms of like being an instructor. Hopefully I will be one day. But this is my first class with you guys, so you guys can tell me how that's going, you know? But yeah, when I used to sit and watch Bob Ross, and then I would go out into the backyard with my mom, and she bought me a watercolor set, and I painted trees and landscapes. Oh, I painted everything. Oh my God. It was so much fun. And can you imagine having that kind of influence on someone? You know, having that kind of influence on like generations of kids. And I love that now you can stream all of it and you can watch it. And, you know, when I first started teaching art, and I really haven't taught a whole lot, I watched a couple of his videos and I thought, wow, holy cow, he was so good, you know? He was so good. So I'm just using more lights, and you can't see it in the camera, but maybe I can kind of tilt it a little bit, but like, I'm kind of dipping into this white a little bit more. Oh, maybe that's good. Maybe I can leave my palette here. I'm dipping into this white a little bit more and just sort of going for it right here. So here. Oh, someone here said, my interest in art began as a form of therapy for me. Yes, guys, I'm a very anxious person, and being a painter is awesome because, I mean, there are very few things that you can do that is basically can be all yours, right? All yours. Like it doesn't have to be for anybody else. Like I like to show my work in galleries, but you know what? Like this is a really amazing thing in which you never have to show people what you do. Like art is incredibly private, and some of us choose to make it not private. And I like to show people things. I like to share, you know, but you know, you don't have to do that. And as I said, like, you guys can share your work with me on Artist Network later on, but you don't have to. You also don't have to. I mean, I would love to see it, but you really just don't have to. You can do whatever you want, you know? Like, if you want to keep what you do here super private, also totally okay. Okay, so I am going to be, you see how already this is getting built up, right? So from the ugliness, I'm starting to kind of go into where the tones of the whites are. So I am blocking that in really slowly as I'm talking to you guys and telling you guys a little bit more. And hi to everybody who just joined us. And remember, you guys can see this video later after we go live. And you can always go back and watch this and any other videos, including all the ones that, you know, I think, well, Scott's doing Draw With Me on Wednesdays, and he's great. And you can always watch all those too. And those are really fun. I was watching his videos so I can prepare myself to teach this with you guys. Because I honestly haven't done a ton of instructing. I really only started, I am not a formal teacher. In fact, I actually really love being an informal teacher. I love kind of doing classes in which I'm teaching people like you guys who may or may not have ever painted before. In fact, sometimes my favorite students are the ones who have never, ever painted before. Those are super fun because after they're done, it feels like it's a superpower. You know, it feels like I taught them something like strange that was always inside of them. Oh yeah, I am on Instagram, so you can just find me. You could just type my name in. And it's my name, gigichen.art. And you can kind of see what else I'm kind of up to on that. Yeah, so I kind of think it's really interesting. Like, the whole idea of art education is pretty new for me, but I like the idea of teaching people purely for the joy of it. You know, like, I've never thought to teach academically in like colleges. Which I actually think is really great when people can do it. Like, I never even thought that I could ever really teach, actually. So here I am, I'm still blocking in the lights, guys. I'm blocking in where these, and I haven't even started really using a lot of white. You see, this is not even really white. This is kind of like the pinkish lilac color I made. And I'm just gonna slowly, you see where I like drew, remember when we drew in where the veins were? I'm just doing that. I'm basically going right next to it, still leaving those darks, and I'm just going over these parts. You see how already it's looking more like a flower? Isn't that kind of cool, you know? I'm gonna go do this and do that. Somebody's saying that the palette looks like I have multiple flowers. I know, it's a mess, guys. If you guys want to learn more academic palette making, I don't think I'm that person for you. I have never, you know, I have never ever been I know that there are some artists that use just a little bit of paint and just kind of do little dabs, and then they have like a beautiful palette that could practically be a work of art. I am not that kind of artist. And I'm sure you guys can look up how to do that, and maybe one day I'll even try to do that with you guys, but I feel like instinctually I have never been that kind of artist. So I'm gonna keep adding some, yeah, I'm using this filbert, and you could also use a round, which is like a pointy brush, but I'm using this filbert and I'm just sort of doing this. So as I said, sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to why I'm using all. I feel I'm very much into the idea of teaching and also on your end learning based on what feels good for you. You know, like, I don't want you to be bogged down with a ton of, I don't want you guys to be bogged down by the materials. I want you guys to really just enjoy painting. You know, I want you guys to like watch how you paint and pay attention to that, and change up the way you use your materials based on what you're comfortable with. Like, there are a lot of, like, even cheap craft paint. I love cheap craft paint. I love using that. I love using it because it doesn't dry as fast. And so right now what I'm doing is I made this lilac color. It's some white and some of this red and a little bit of this Payne's gray. And it's sort of like right in between. I'm going to add a little bit more white to it. And what I'm doing is, I'm going to blot this. I'm blotting it on my lap, and I want you guys to kind of gently brush it in. So I still want to keep some of this dark, so I don't want you to go over all of that yet. I'm just going to gently brush it in. And this is a great time to use a little bit of medium or a little bit of water and kind of just gently brush it in. I'm just doing this. So there's a lot of places where I'm just going to keep repeating the same motions. So if you guys don't catch it the first time, I'm going to keep doing it. See how already this is starting to look like a flower? There we go. Okay. There we go. A little bit more. And I might even add a little bit more red back into that. And see, it's all in layers, right? You see how everything is kind of building up? So we went from all of this to this, which is so much prettier. And I'm just going to keep going. And yeah, keep referring to your references. Keep referring to your references and go back. And remember, you could always add more detail later. Like, we're not adding, like, say, detail. We're still I would say we're more blocking in the detail. Okay, there we go. There we go. Yeah, so you see, since I'm not using a ton of paint, and you can kind of see that every time I do something, you can still see some of this detail that's still there. So I'm just going to block it in, block it in. And I'm just kind of making these simple little strokes. And as I said, you guys can try whatever brush works for you. So I'm going to go here. So in the example, you're going to, all of this part is much lighter. You know, the whole top of the flower is much lighter. So that's why I'm painting this way down. There we go. Also, I think it's really important to be painting, especially things that are round, like along the plane, right? So this flower is pushing in this way, so I want to be painting this way. Like, I want to be painting in the same way. Like, if I were painting this way, it wouldn't help with the contours of it. Let's see. I really want to go to art school when I'm older, but is it a viable career choice? Ooh, what a question. So complicated. Can we cover that while we're painting together? I think like anything else, I never suggest that everyone quit their jobs, and like always, like, right, I think it's really important. Like, I think something that happened to me was at some point I realized that I really wanted to do this. Like, I've worked with artists and I see that it's both incredibly hard. It's really hard. It can be really difficult depending on what you're looking to do. I wanted to be a fine artist and I wanted to show in galleries. So like anything else, I think it's really important to like ask yourself what your ultimate goal is. Is your ultimate goal to paint every day? Is your ultimate goal to draw every day? Is your ultimate goal, like, meaning that, like, are we, like, I think it's really good to start off with a set of goals first rather than like say a long-term, like, oh, I want to, like, I think it's really good for you to get really good at something before you say quit it and do it full time, right? Like I mean, I ended up working full time completely accidentally. Like, I had some jobs and then I didn't work those jobs anymore, you know? But I never suggest people quitting their jobs to like pursue art career full time, but I do say that you should spend, if you really want to ultimately become a full-time artist, you should just do it as much as possible. Do it all the time. Do it all the time, and then start to ask yourself, like, what do I really want to do with this? Like, what is like the ultimate goal with this, right? So I would say that I just say that keep making art and then asking yourself what you want. Like, you know, if at some point you realize that you have a lot of paintings and you want to start showing in a gallery, you should do that for a while. But as I said, don't quit your day job. And then also, if that starts working out, then you can slowly say leave a career you're with. But I mean, I'm not a career coach. I would just say that for me, it was always a very, it's been a meandering path for the last 15 years, you know? Like nothing has been guaranteed, no matter how hard you try. But I would say that what is maintained throughout my whole career is that I love what I do. I love what I do. And so I have a reason to do it every day. I mean, if I didn't do this full time, I would still be doing it full time, if that makes any sense. Oh, and hi Dan, how are you doing? My friend Dan is here. He's from here too. He's also an artist. He's amazing. Okay, so I'm gonna start blocking in the whites. So I'm gonna use a little bit more white and add it to that like funny little pink color I made with the Payne's gray and the red and the white. And so this is dry, so I can put my hand right on it. Oh yeah, somebody's saying, oh, they're getting commissions from their friends. Yes, guys, if you paint a lot, the first people who are gonna support you, hopefully, are gonna be your friends and the people that you're with. Like, you can't always expect suddenly you're gonna meet a gallery and they're gonna love you. I mean, those are dreams, right? I mean, it's really hard. I spent years in my 20s thinking, oh, I'm so good, someone's gonna pick me up. But, you know, sometimes that's not really like always thing. And even then, sometimes still not selling enough work, right? So I would say always like work as much as you can. And if you want to, and you know, if you really want to make it like, say, a part of your life as like commercially, then you do it in phases. Like you can start selling to people you know, and then you can sell online, you know. Oh, someone is asking me if I've used oil paint. Yes, I was actually initially trained as an oil painter, but I have switched to acrylics the last 5 years. So it's pretty awesome actually, which is why I'm here with you guys right now, right? And I also love that acrylic in a lot of ways is still a fairly new medium. So I'm gonna just start blocking in the lights even more than I was, with more white. And I actually might add a little bit of yellow to this white, just to kind of change up a little bit. Because just using sort of white, see, look, already, that's a little bit prettier. Got a little bit more yellow there. And I'm also gonna add a little bit more medium. A little bit of medium here. Oh, you can't see it. I'm gonna add a little bit more medium. And use that and mix it in with that yellow and the white, and kind of mix it in together. So I'm kind of making, kind of thinning it out, and then I'm just going to really thinly layer down. See how that's kind of translucent, right? You can still see it. Isn't that cool? So already the painting is like starting to build up. So, and this is where I say layering and glazing comes in, but glazing is more sort of on top, but I'm sort of layering. So what I'm doing is I took a little bit of the white and I took a little bit of the cadmium and I mixed it in, and then I added some medium. And you could also do this with water. You could add a little bit of water if you don't have a medium. And then I'm just sort of lightly brushing it on top. Yeah. Oh, I don't teach with color pencil. Someone's asking me whether or not I've taught with color pencil before. I have taught other things, you know, I've taught ballpoint pen classes and stuff, but I don't, I've never, as I said, I actually haven't taught a whole lot. Do you guys want to know how I started teaching how to paint? I mean, that's a really funny story. So I had never taught anybody up until about 3 years ago. I had a friend that was teaching drinking and paint classes, like for parties. And she said, oh, you know, the people that I'm working with need another artist, and I think that it'll be really fun. You should try to give that a try. And I did, and it was awesome. And I before that I had never ever taught before. Up until 3 years ago, I'd never taught before. And so I would teach these classes twice a week to people who were partying and hanging out and kind of rowdy, you know? And that's when I realized, oh, you know, if I can teach people who are kind of tipsy and who are kind of just hanging out, and they can still come up with something pretty awesome, then I think I can kind of teach anybody, right? I can teach you guys, it was pretty fun. We would have little dance parties during the class. So I'm still just kind of adding still going along the veins of the flower, adding a little bit more of a glaze. So yeah, I kind of figured that if I could teach people who are kind of hanging out and who weren't actually even supposed to pay attention, then I can kind of teach anybody who's really, really, really paying attention, right? And that was always something that I would say to them when they would come to these party classes, is that I said, if you guys want to do this, like, you just have to pay attention. That literally is the only rule. Like, if you pay attention, I promise you at the end you'll have something pretty awesome. And I would say that that was true pretty much for everybody, except for the ones who really didn't want to, who weren't into it. And that's okay, you know, because it was a party, not exactly a class. Let's see. Yeah, but so, yeah, hopefully, I mean, who knows what will happen. I mean, I love teaching this class so far. I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm still having a pretty great time with you guys, you know? So I'm still kind of using this, like, so I know that I'm kind of looking like I'm kind of going pretty quickly, but I'm going back, and there's a little bit of, going back to that white and cadmium mix, and I'm going back to sort of just highlight even more of this white, you know, and a little bit, and going back. So it's already starting to build up and look pretty cool, right? I didn't think it was gonna ever get past the ugly duckling phase, you know? But it does get past the ugly duckling phase. So I'm gonna work down here because it's been a bit neglected. I'm going to add a little bit more white here, and I'm gonna go right back up here. I'm gonna make a little bit more of this yellow and cadmium mix, and go back and do this a little bit. And isn't that already kind of pretty? You know, just adding white is one thing, but adding a little bit of the yellow kind of makes it glisten a little bit. And that's always kind of thing, you know, sometimes you think that in order to create lights, you just have to add white. But what if you tried something a little bit different, you know? What if you added a little bit, like, I could add a little bit of blue to this, because there's already so the Payne's gray already has like bluish tint. It's kind of like a blue-black, you know? So that's why I'm preferring to use, I prefer to use Payne's gray sometimes over black, just because it gives it a little bit more something, you know? Like attention to detail in those ways is always really helpful, because then you can kind of, I mean, it's really easy to think, oh, if I add white, then it's just gonna change the tone, but it's not, you know? Like, it's sort of, you can do that, but then you don't get as much dimension. So I'm gonna add a little bit of more medium to that little white, and I'm gonna blot it off a little bit on my rag, and I'm just gonna slowly drag this down like a layer. I'm gonna drag that. Still kind of paying attention to the fact that there's like separation between the petals. Okay, now I'm just gonna jump around a little bit more, you know? There we go. I'm gonna go back right in here, and I'm going to go back to I made a little umber mix with the red. I'm gonna go back to that, and I'm gonna put a little bit of Payne's gray into it. Not too much. Ooh, put too much. Okay, and I'm just gonna go back over it. I'm still gonna try to leave this as much, you know, but I'm gonna try to create some dimension from it. I wanna leave this like yellow part still kind of clean. Because I mean, obviously we're talking about layering, but it would be really nice to not fight the yellow, because yellow can get easily just kind of messed up, you know. So here we go. I'm going to push this up. And I'm kind of painting this way, right? I'm painting this way, or painting along the contours of the painting. Okay, I'm gonna add a little bit of the red. It's a funny thing, you know, painting and talking at the very same time. Like, because everything I do, I have to kind of narrate, which is kind of funny. Okay. bit more of this. And I'm just gonna go over that a little bit. Okay, so now we already have a little bit more dimension here. And then the more layers we put down, the smoother it's gonna start to look. So I'm just gonna use a little bit of red up here and and I'm still just using the same brush, guys. I mean, maybe I should paint the rest of this whole painting with just this one brush, so we can really champion the idea of limited resources, you know, limited materials. Because I actually really, my favorite brush really is this like filbert. Like these are my favorite kinds. They're my favorite shape of a painting tool, you know. Because if they're really good, you can really kind of get like a good line with them too. Okay, I'm gonna add a little bit more medium, a little bit of this red, and kind of go back into this. And then I'm gonna go right back into the bottom because we haven't really worked on that too much. I'm gonna make that, I know a lot of artists actually tend to make big batches of paint, and I really don't do that, which is silly, but I actually really love mixing paint. So I have, I'm gonna make the red, a little bit of that Payne's gray again, and kind of mix it up. A little bit more Payne's gray, and then I'm gonna add some white in there. I'm gonna add some more of that. Also, some artists use palette knives. I don't tend to use a lot of palette knives. I mean, we can talk about palette knives. We can, I can maybe try working with a palette knife one of these classes. You know, I don't know if you guys want an extra tool. Okay, so I'm making this, I made this, I'm also gonna add a little bit of this ultramarine in here to make it a little bit, so I want this underside to be a little bit more blue. So I'm gonna just add a little bit of ultramarine into this mix and add a little bit more white. Okay. I'm blotting it on my rag, on my lap. I cannot tell you how important it is to have a rag with you. So I'm going to paint the bottom, which is going to be, you see how I added a little bit of the ultramarine to keep it more blue. Okay, I'm going to just paint that in, and it's going to keep it, it's going to be fairly solid. But I'm also going to try not to go over the veins too much because I want to maintain that and I want to see that. I'm going to do the same thing over here on this side. I actually might even add a little bit more Payne's gray into this. Oh, maybe too much. Well, you know, sometimes that happens. I'm going to add a little bit more. Okay. Let's see. Do you do anything with hard versus soft lines for a sense of recession? Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of, yes, I mean, when we start really getting to the end of it, I would say the hard lines versus the soft lines, sometimes I think of it more as like, you know, like details versus like blocking in. Like right now we're blocking in. And I think I've already been trying to differentiate, like having these like harder lines to kind of differentiate like from petal to petal. So yeah, sure, I do like think about that a lot. And as I'm kind of painting these parts in, I'm already thinking, you see, I'm already like, see how I'm leaving this really hard. I'm thinking, I mean, you have to think about like soft versus hard, because I want to keep these details really soft and kind of have some things be really like hard lines, just to kind of, because everything, especially a flower, kind of goes back and forth between soft and hard, and also that also creates a little bit of dimension. Also, visually, when you look at it, it's really nice to see that in a painting when you have some parts that are soft, some parts that are hard. But I really like to think about that more near the end because I kind of think that more as like a detail thing. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, but maybe your approach will also be really, really different. So I'm going to add some white here, and I'm just gonna start to. So, you know, you probably notice I don't clean my brush a lot, especially when I'm working the same color family, because like all of these are pretty much about the same colors. Like I basically have not put this back in the water. I haven't put this back in the water because I've just been, I know that I can kind of keep this going and the paint is still wet. And, oh, so I wish that I had talked about this earlier, but I'm working on a wet palette. There is a video and there's a resource down below that shows you how to make a wet palette. It's really easy. And basically it's just like a cellulose sponge and a piece of parchment paper and a tray. This one I am using is a commercially bought one from an art store, and it has like a sponge underneath, and it keeps everything really wet. Like, so right now the reason why everything is still staying super wet is because it's on a wet palette. I mean, if you're using, say, like a paper plate, you probably notice that your paint is drying faster, unless you're using like a slightly cheaper paint, you know, which is something I completely forgot to talk about earlier. Okay, so I'm using, actually, I'm gonna clean this a little bit. I'm gonna clean this. Sometimes I don't want to clean it, I just go through another brush, but as I said, I'm really determined to use less materials for this painting. I've got the white, and I'm going to start putting in some of the light here, and some of this paint is still, so I don't press down really hard when I paint. I don't know if you guys notice that. Like, I kind of just sort of glide on top. Like, I'm not like, you know, I'm not playing, I'm not kind of pushing really hard. I'm kind of like gliding. I'm using sort of like the tip of my filbert and kind of gliding on it. Like I don't really paint super hard. I kind of hang out with it a little bit, kind of like singing along with it. I'm also gonna use this like yellow that I made, that yellow white that I made, and kind of go back and glaze over that a little bit. And continuing to just sort of build up the layers, and already it's looking pretty great, guys. Like I hope you guys are keeping up. I hope it's kind of working out. Let's see. Oh, someone wants to know how I clean my brushes when I switch colors. I mean, it's just water. My water's dirty right now. I just sort of do that, and then I wipe it on my rag. It's not a thing. But I do suggest that you guys clean your brushes right after this class, or else your poor brushes will become super deformed. Like, even if you have them in water, it's not great to keep them upside down in water like that, because then like the bristles get like pushed down. So I would really, really suggest using like a pretty good moisturizing soap. Like I think I use Ivory soap because it's pretty moisturizing. And then I just sort of leave them in my jar upside down for them to dry. There we go. I'm gonna go back to a little bit of this white and this yellow, and just gonna layer back this. I'm still building. I think I wanna go back to doing more of the midtones so I can kind of complete this faster with you guys. Someone's asking me, will I be doing landscapes or old barns, your favorite subject? I planned out the next, we're starting off with the first like 8 episodes, and I've actually have not decided to do barns yet, but I do actually paint a lot of old houses. And maybe we can think about that if we decide to do like another round of this class. But I think if you go on the artist website, the show page for this, you can already see the next, you can see the first 5 classes that are already planned. So I think our next class, we're gonna be talking about contrasting colors, and we're gonna be painting a fish. I'm gonna do some pattern work with you to show you guys how to make something look really 3D. We're gonna paint jellyfish and learn about monochrome painting. Okay, so I'm using this lilac-y color, and I'm just gonna brush over it. So I actually I may have a lot of ideas. I mean, really infinite ideas, but the way I've been choosing what we do is I wanted to touch upon, like, I wanted the flower to be first because everybody paints flowers, everybody wants flowers. And because in a lot of ways, they're not something that I do, I also really wanted to learn along with you guys as I did this. So, I mean, really, the sky's the limit if this show keeps going and we keep doing like more shows, right, together. We will, I mean, there are so many things that I want to do. And eventually, I'm going to ask you guys kind of what you guys want to paint, you know, when we start thinking about progressing this show further. Okay, so I'm doing lights. I'm still going down. But you see how like parts of this is like, looks so much more complete. And I'm just going to go back into this mid-tone and slide back into this. And so really, I'm not using really thick layers. I'm not globbing out a lot of paint. I'm doing a little bit. Okay. I'm really just using really thin layers, and I am putting down. Still, I'm just doing section by section. Oh, someone asked me if I would do a house tutorial. Whew, guys, let me put that in the back of my head because I love painting old houses. If you guys see a lot of the work that I have done, I paint houses all the time because houses have been a symbol for me of like, you know, it's a very personal symbol for all of us. You know, the way you grow up, where you live. The idea of home is really important to me. So yeah, maybe I can work that into like a future episode. I love old houses also. So guys, I grew up in New York City. Like, this is where I am right now. I grew up in Queens, and I never went into the countryside and saw old houses until I was much older. Okay, so I'm going back into the yellow and the white. And so when I first started traveling outside of the city, I couldn't, old houses are beautiful. And I want to, I mean, we can work that in. That would be something. I'm gonna think about that a little bit. Okay, so I'm still brushing down. And now let's really go for finishing up parts of these. So I'm using this lilac color that I made out of the Payne's gray and the red and the white. And I'm gonna go right into some of these areas. And so some of these areas can look a lot more finished. I'm also gonna go in and put a little bit of umber into that mix. I'm gonna put it on here on the side. I'm gonna grab a little bit of this lilac because I want to add some parts that are a little bit warmer, because otherwise it's just gonna look the same. So it's really thin. You see, I'm adding a little bit of umber, and then I'm just like brushing it on the surface. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to go right back into some of this. Put a little bit of red and a little bit of umber. I'm going to go back to some more of this lilac and see how I kind of just went right over that because it's already pretty dry, you know. See how quickly it dries? See, it's barely even mixing with it. It's just sort of going right over it. And I'm gonna do a little bit of this white and this yellow, going back into it. Blotting, I'll blot my paintbrush a little bit more. I'm gonna go over. Okay. So I'm just using the side of my brush to kind of go over. Guys, remember, I'm still using the same brush. I haven't even changed it yet. So I have this like very light lilac color and this yellow white color that I made. See, it's not always a rhyme or reason. I wish I can teach you guys like all this like very particular stuff, you know, but I mostly have like small batches of paint all over, and I just keep going back and forth. Why do you want to add parts that are warmer? Okay, so if I to give a like quick idea of like what, you know, when you look at a painting, I mean, actually, if you just kind of look, when you're painting, the idea would, you always kind of instinctually want to lighten a color by adding white, you know? And I think that sometimes when you do that, you kind of flatten it out, and it kind of just looks very, I would say, kind of very basic and rudimentary. And when you add a little bit of like a different kind of tone to it, it can make like this part is already a little bit more shimmery because it's a little bit different than here because it has more white in it, you know? And I like the idea of adding some warmer tones, some cooler tones, just kind of break up the space, break up the light, and it kind of makes it a little just more yummy. You know, like I'm all about trying to make a painting look a little bit more yummy and look a little less, in a lot of ways, a little bit less predictable, because I think that, I think sometimes when your instinct is always to think, oh, I'm going to make something darker by adding black. Oh, I'm going to make something lighter by adding white. But maybe if you sort of like skew that a little bit and think, okay, like what is another, like whites can be all sorts of different tones. Like there are some whites that are like, there's a titanium white, which is bright white. And then there is another kind of titanium white that, I don't remember what it's called, but it's like warmer. And it's almost like a buff white. And you're still calling it white. And maybe if you didn't have something to compare it to, it still would be white. But adding something a little bit warmer, like if you're making a really cool painting, like right now we're doing, you add a little bit of warmth, it can really kind of make it sparkle. And if you're doing a really warm painting, you add a little bit of cool spot somewhere, it could also kind of make it go, oh, like you can make the viewer go, whoa, I didn't expect that. Like, oh, look at that. You know, like I share an art studio with some painters, and they say to me sometimes you add a little bit of a dot of like a red cadmium, because everyone's gonna go, oh, whoa, what's that? So the idea is like, yes, you're painting a flower, but wouldn't it be nice if you painted a flower in a different way and sort of translate it in a different way? And by adding, say right now I'm adding this like warmer white right here, like it can add a little bit of sparkle just because of that. Like, so instead of just using straight white, to add a little bit of this like white yellow, I mean, already is sort of like, isn't that kind of nice? Kind of looks like the sun is like hitting it in these like very special spots, you know, because otherwise, I mean, it's all good to just use white, but right now I really want to teach you guys like a different way to think about what color can do, you know. Oh, is there a way to prevent smudging when I lean on my painting? I mean, so I kind of like acrylic because it dries really quickly and I don't tend to do that, but you can kind of put a piece of paper over an area if it's like really, really wet. But I would say, or just try to hover over it. Sometimes I just like hover over the painting. Or you can just be patient and let it dry before you work on it, you know? But also, I also have a tendency to work, since I work all over, and this is a really small painting, but when it's a really big painting, I like to I have to remind myself to work from left to right because I'm a righty, you know? So I go from one area to the other, and especially, otherwise I will put my hand in it, you know? Okay, so we're gonna go right back into adding some more lilac. And really, as I said, I'm really kind of just brushing over the surface. And see, this part already looks like so much more finished than the rest of it, right? So I'm gonna go back and add a little bit more red to the lilac, add a little bit more umber to that. And I'm gonna blot my brush and very, very slowly just sort of, oh yeah, unbleached white. Somebody just said that's a warmer white. Because like titanium white is super, 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 super white. And titanium white is almost like a raw white, you know? Thank you guys. Thank you for answering that question for me. But I love the color buff white, which I don't think I put on the list. Actually, I might be using that for one of the shows, which I don't know if I ended up putting that in the list and everyone's gonna get mad at me for not mentioning it in the main list. But buff white is a color that I love. It is almost like that unbleached white. It's really warm. It's warmer, you know, and I love that because, as I said, it adds a little bit of dimension. So I'm gonna go and use a little bit more of this white. So basically all my colors right now are pretty dirty. So, which is why I'm trying to keep it all in like certain areas so like the greens don't mix into everything. As I said, not a champion of the perfect palette. So I'm gonna add a little bit more like white right here. And we're actually getting to this amazing phase where we might actually finish. Look at that. Isn't that crazy? I mean, I know it doesn't seem like it right now, but we're heading to the home stretch, guys. You know, hopefully, or getting it to a point where I feel like confident that we're gonna finish. So I'm gonna go right back here, and I'm also gonna go right back into going back into that like blotch of like the yellow white that I made. And like I would have added buff white for this class, but as I said, didn't want to complicate it. And even then I have barely used a lot of paint. I really haven't used a lot of paint. I'm gonna go and make that color again, the yellow white color. So it's the white, it's some cadmium, and since my brush is dirty, it's got that pink in it. And I'm gonna add a little bit more of this red. I'm gonna blot my brush, and I'm going to, I'm trying to make like a pretty little gradation here. So I am very slowly gonna get really close to the painting and brushing that. As I said, I'm not using a lot of paint. You see how that's already kind of like a gradation? And I'm using this yellow white and just adding a little bit more white to it. Blotting my, and there. So that's already kind of awesome, right? It's pretty cool. And I'm gonna just go back and like add that edge. And then we're gonna keep moving this way now, okay? This is when we're getting to the point where it's gonna be, this is pretty awesome now. Like it's no longer looking like an ugly duckling. So with my brush that already had that white, I'm gonna go right back into this lilac, and I'm going to sort of touch on the veins again, just to know where they are. And at the same time, I'm also going to very lightly brush. I'm gonna put that vein back. Go back to this like lilac-y purple. And it's actually I mean, as I said, as I mentioned before, I'm not cleaning my brush a whole lot. I really almost haven't, except for when someone asks me how do I paint, how do I clean my brush. Yeah, you see, this is what I talked about with building layers. Like all of a sudden, this whole part looks pretty cool. You know, looks pretty awesome. I'm gonna go back into. I'm gonna add details along because I want to kind of just sequentially go over this painting with you. Otherwise, you can kind of bounce around too. And going back to some of this white. I want some more of this white back. I want to, like, you know, so how even this is a little bit more pink, you know, and how this is a little bit more yellow. Like it looks really pretty that way. Just to have a little bit of like variation in the way you like light a painting, like really, really changes it, you know? Like I think that a lot of people have seen a ton of flower paintings, and in a lot of ways it can be incredibly predictable, but haven't you like run into a flower painting even recently and you go, wow, like what is it about this that is so different and so new? Even though I've seen a ton of flower paintings, it's because they thought about the light in a different way, you know? And I want you guys to think about light in a different way. I want you guys to think of like an alternative to like a white, an alternative to a blue. Like, as I said, I'm not using almost any black in this. I'm only really using, instead of using straight blue in the flower, I'm really using Payne's gray, because Payne's gray is an incredibly versatile, and it might actually be my favorite color right now. And a different alternative to make like a purple, right? Like sometimes you're thinking I want to use red and blue and make it purple, but I love that the Payne's gray creates this really cool like lilac-y color. Okay, so I'm making another cool lilac-y color. I'm about to go up here and continue to brush in. Okay, doesn't the paint dry on your brush if you don't keep it wet? Well, the paint is still wet on my palette, and as long as you're continuing to put paint on your brush, the brush, I mean, hasn't dried at all. Like, it's still working, you know? So I mean, unless I kind of let it just sit and not move it around, then it will dry. Like right now it's not, it really just hasn't. But that'd be a funny thing. I never thought about that. That's a very particular question that I've never thought about, because I've always just, once I start using a brush, I'm just using it. Like that's just what I'm doing. Like I'm not like thinking about it too much. And if it does, I mean, I've never came to the point where I was using a brush, oh, and it's just like dry. Like I've never had that happen before. I think as long as the paintbrush still has wet paint on it, the paintbrush is still moist. Okay, so we're going to continue to paint this part in. And also, I don't know if you guys can see it under the camera, but like right here is still, like on the very edge is still like the underpainting of the lilac. And that's really pretty. I wish I could bring the painting up a little bit closer, but I can't move the camera. So that's also some little effects that you're gonna find that you're gonna see as you do this. Okay, I'm just adding some more veins. And already this is looking pretty great. I'm really excited about this. I'm gonna add a little bit of more white and really just see how layering and layering and layering, you're like eventually it becomes like this magical moment where you're like, oh, it looks like a painting. Like you know, it's really funny. I have made so many paintings and I am still surprised by when it gets to a point where you're like, wow, this is a painting. This isn't just some thing anymore. Like it's no longer ugly. Like I'm surprised, even though I have done this painting before, like I'm like, yeah, it's really cool. Like I'm getting to the point where I really feel confident. And I think about, I think at some point I was like, oh no, I'm never gonna make it, you know? Okay, so I'm gonna go, let's work a little bit more closer down here. I'm gonna clean my brush. I'm gonna blot it. As I said, I'm still using the same brush, but you don't have to, you can change it up. And I'm gonna start working in this area a little bit. So I'm gonna go into the red. I'm gonna add a little bit of umber. And I'm going to very thinly apply paint right here, right in this area, just to smooth out these colors a little bit. You see already, you can kind of see them smooth. And I'm gonna paint along the veins again. And I'm gonna go back and use a little bit of this lilac. And with that paint still on my brush, I went into the lilac. Okay, there we go. And I'm just gonna smooth it out, and I'm going all the way down. So all the way down. I'm gonna go back into that lilac. Okay, go back into this lilac. Okay, go back into the white. Oh, someone's asking me if I also paint landscapes. Not so much. Actually, I don't paint a lot of landscapes. I really want to get better at them, you know? So funny thing, you know, I think I had mentioned earlier that I have only been painting with acrylics for about 5 years, and landscapes are definitely something I want to tackle at some point. Yeah. Hopefully I've done some. I'm not amazing. Like I thought, you know how like a lot of people paint like sky scenes? I like have barely done that yet. And I really probably need to spend like a few weeks just practicing painting sky scenes and landscapes with acrylic. You would think that would be something that I'm like I would have like figured out, but every time I try something different, I'm really surprised. Just like with flowers, I'm really surprised at how difficult flowers are. I'm really surprised at how difficult painting clouds are, and because like the instinct is to kind of like paint them like the way you did when you were a kid, or even like because I painted oils, in a lot of ways, like using oils, like you can kind of move the paint around a lot. But with because of that, this has been a little bit more challenging, like painting, learning how to paint landscapes. Like I really have to, like anything else, I have to decide to intentionally learn how to make landscapes. Okay, I'm blotting my brush on I'm going back to the lilac, and I'm gonna paint down. So already it's looking really nice. I'm going to go back to the red and the Payne's gray mix and go back over some of this. So everything I'm doing is layers, guys, very thin layers. I just trying to do them as quickly as I can so I can go to another area. So already that's looking pretty cool, you know. Okay, and I'm gonna use just a little bit of medium and mix that in. And as I said, if you don't have medium, that's okay. You can use a little bit of water. And I'm just gonna start adding. Just kind of glaze in that like line and go over here to do the same. Kind of glaze in a layer. Go back to that lilac, put a little bit more red into that lilac. Go over there. Ooh, I'm gonna add a little bit more white. A little bit more Payne's gray. Okay. And there, that's already smoothing out, isn't it? Okay, now let's move on to this next one. Okay, a little bit more white. I want this petal to be a little bit lighter than the one next to it. So I'm already going to start putting a glaze of this pink and this lilac. Yeah, I'm mostly just using this lilac color that I made out of Payne's gray and the red, and going back to a little bit of the white and okay. I'm gonna add a little bit of medium just to move it around. I think also with the medium, I think instinctually you start using certain things. Like you start instinctually knowing whether or not you need a medium, especially when you get to this phase where you're sort of, you don't want to cover up everything that you're doing, that you've already done, you know? Okay, so, right. I'm gonna go back to this like white and yellow mix. As I said, I made that white and yellow mix with a little bit of the cadmium and a little bit of the white, and I put a little bit of medium into it, in there. Okay, going back over that. I'm gonna go back into the lilac, put a little bit more red back in there, and I'm going to start smoothing out these areas. And look at that, it's already looking pretty awesome, almost pretty finished. And guys, like I want you guys, if you really want, like after this class, keep working on it, even if you get beyond the stage where I end up while doing this class. Like, I want you guys to continue to work on it. If you want to keep layering paint onto it and really making it look photographic, I would be super impressed. Like, in order to make it really photographic, we have to be sitting here for the next day, but I don't want to do that. I really want to just teach you how magical it is to paint things in layers. Okay. All right. So I'm going back in there with some of this lilac. And let's go back into, I'm going to go back into this umber and red mix I made, and I'm gonna start like creating more of these darks. And as I said, I haven't even cleaned my brush yet. Like, I'm just sort of brushing. I'm just gonna kind of brush right over the top. Add a little bit more of this red, add a little bit more of the umber into this mix, And I'm just gonna start, I'm gonna use the side of my brush and just, look how cool that is. And I kind of noticed that the middle is a little bit neglected, but I'm gonna get to that in a second. I'm gonna skip into that. I'm gonna go, so this is like a pretty dark part. I'm gonna go use an umber in the red. See how I'm not using black? I'm not using black, not because I don't like black. I know that there are some teachers that teach you not to use black. I use black all the time. But I love the idea of teaching you guys how to use colors in a different way, like the alternative, right? You can also make like an amazing green, mixing just like yellow and black, right? You don't have to use a straight up green. Just like I'm not using straight up black, I'm using a lot of like browns and umber. I'm using the umbers, I'm using the Payne's gray. Okay, and I'm just gonna fill that in. I'm gonna fill that dark part in, which is gonna be the darkest part. But even look how pretty it is, even though there's no black. Like you can still have like some dimension. All right, let's, I'm gonna clean my brush really quick. Maybe I can even switch brushes. Let me switch brushes then. I have the exact same filbert. So, you know, what can I do? Same one, just cleaner. I'm gonna take my ochre, yellow ochre, add a little bit of this umber to it, and I'm going to start kind of filling it in a little bit. I'm just kind of dotting it out because we're kind of getting to like a really good, almost complete phase with it. So I'm gonna leave some of that, and I'm gonna let that dry. How about that? I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red to it. I'm gonna let that dry. I'm gonna get back to that later. So this, what I said, this is a lesson about layering. This is also a lesson about patience. Like I am basically saying, you're only gonna do part of it, and now let's get back to it later. So we're gonna get back to it later. I'm gonna put my brush in the water. I'm going to bring back my other brush, and we're going to finish up the rest of this before we start really like messing around with all that. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my lilac mix. I'm gonna add a little bit more of this Payne's gray. I'm gonna add a little bit of water. It's tough talking through an entire class, you know? Okay, so I put a little bit of more Payne's gray into this lilac. Okay, and I'm going to paint underneath it. Oh, I messed that up. Okay. Also, your finger is a tool. You can also wipe things off if you mess up. I'm gonna leave some of that white to kind of denote the veins a little bit. I'm also going to go back to that lilac. I'm going to add a little bit more Payne's gray and a little bit more white back into it. And once again, I want you guys to denote where the veins were. See, these veins are still here. I'm still leaving that. Really important. I'm going to kind of just go this way a little bit just to kind of denote where I want that cast shadow to be. And my drawing and my paintings are not going to look exactly like that reference photo I gave you guys. It's going to look close enough, or rather it's going to have the essence of it. You know, just like I don't expect you guys, especially those of you guys who have never painted before, to have something looking exactly like that photograph, because that, I mean, if you do, I'm really, really, really impressed, and I want to see it. Because even on my end, like I've been painting for a long time, and I personally don't think of myself as a photorealist painter, you know? Okay. Okay, let's see. I'm gonna keep fiddling around with both of these areas at the same time. Okay, I'm gonna add a little bit more white and red to this mix, and a little bit more red to this lilac mix. And then I'm going to start working on the bottom. I'm going to use that and look, creating the vein. Creating the vein. I'm doing the vein like this, you know, to denote like the contours of it. Okay, and I'm going to denote the vein. And the side of the painting. Just need to. Oh, it's already looking pretty close, right, guys? I'm going to, and remember, this video is available after this live stream. And then I want you guys also to please post paintings that you've done for this class, like on the forum that's on Artist Network, and there's going to be a link for that too. So I'm using this lighter color, and I'm going to denote these veins. And I'm going to blot, and I'm going to go into the medium a little bit. Like instinctually, I want to keep some of these darks without going over them too much. So I'm, without actually dipping back into the paint, I'm just like went into the medium, and I'm just like using what's on my brush to, you know, get in there. Let's see, and add a little bit more red. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm going to add a little bit more white into that and a little bit more Payne's gray, and I'm going to add a few more little details here with my brush and go make this part a little bit lighter. I also want to also create some of these darker veins that are in the reference. So I'm going to take a little bit of Ultramarine and mix it in. Actually, I'm going to just do a little bit of Ultramarine and see what happens. And I'm going to denote some of those veins. Look at that. Look how cool that is. I'll do a little bit of that. Okay, pretty cool. Getting there, right, guys? I'm gonna clean my brush. And I'm gonna use this medium. Use a little bit of medium that's no longer on my page. I'm gonna put it right here. A little bit of medium. And I'm gonna grab onto some of this like yellow white that I created. And you see I'm also gonna blot it on my towel a little bit. And I'm going to just, you'll see, I'm going to just like slowly feather these parts. You see how I'm not covering it, I'm like layering on top of it. And so some of those ridges are still there. Isn't that cool? It's kind of like magic, like everything is still kind of there. And that's kind of cool, right? You can still kind of see what's underneath. I'm gonna go back to my lilac, and I'm gonna paint these sides a little bit more. Look how cool that looks. We're kind of getting there. Almost getting there, guys. We're almost done. Okay, I'm going back to the lilac, and I'm going to glaze over some of that, and still kind of leaving some of that mid-tone. I'm going to go back into a little bit of my white, and I'm going to put it right into my lilac, and I'm going to start just differentiating some of these. These veins. Brush over some of this too. Then I'm going to go back into that yellow white, add a little bit more white to it, And I'm going to glide and make these. So once again, like my paint is not super thick, and I'm just sort of gliding over it. Sometimes it's really kind of nice to even leave these like little weird like parts that are a little bit more translucent. How are you making the paint translucent when overlayered? I'm basically not using a lot of paint, you know? My palette is also wet. Like I'm using a wet palette, like what I said before. Like I have this wet palette that has some paper and this cellulose sponge that I bought from an art store. But as I said, there's a video for how to make one. And so while my paint is still fairly wet, I'm able to because my paint is still like fairly wet, and even if you don't have a wet palette, you could do this by just adding a little bit more water. And I'm making everything translucent by not grabbing onto a lot of paint and also really kind of lightly painting over what I'm doing. I'm not like globbing on a ton of paint. I'm actually, you see my palette? I have actually barely touched my paint. I'm really kind of, because I'm doing layers, like I put on lots of paint for all of them, but I've like barely touched the paint that I actually put on my palette. It keeps it kind of fairly economical that way, and also because we're doing layers, it's creating translucent layers is the whole like the name of the game for this like class today. Like I want to teach you guys how to use not a lot of paint, not glob it on, and still make these like magical things. And also I'm teaching you guys today how to build a painting from the ground up, which is like layer by layer, which is really how, in a lot of ways, it's a very almost like it's an old master kind of technique. You know, like I'm using my training as an oil painter to teach you guys how to make acrylic paint in the same way, really. Except that we can do it faster because it dries faster, right? Haha. Okay, I'm using a little bit of that white, and I'm going to go right back into here since I have it on my brush. There we go. Is that kind of cool? And I'm going to go into here too. I'm going to take that yellow white, I'm going to go into the lilac a little bit, and I'm going to just go. So by not using a lot of paint, you can still kind of see what's underneath, which is kind of cool, which I mean, as I said, I didn't go to formal fine art school, so I actually don't know what other way there is to do it besides this. Like kind of, I say like kind of get a good feel of your paint. Like I know that our instinct is always to kind of put it all together and then like try to have something immediately just by one layer, but that isn't the lesson today. The lesson is to teach you patience. The lesson is to teach you that, okay, I'm going to work on one area at a time, and I'm going to go like run around the painting and go from one layer and one layer and one layer. So I mean, already we're getting really super close because even though we're doing things what seemingly feels like it's just like endless layers. So I'm going to go back into my lilac. I'm going to put a little bit of medium, and also I can create translucent layers by using a little bit of this like matte medium. I mean, not medium, it's medium that is matte. It's not matte medium. It's a painting medium that you can kind of use to thin down your paint without like diluting it too much. So I'm going to go and use that and kind of go over some of these areas. And also, as I said, I really like to keep variation in paintings. Like there are some parts, I like that some parts look a little bit more loose and some parts look a little bit more tight, you know? And that is what makes a painting exciting to look at. Like I want people to look at what you do today and go, wow, like I noticed that you use something really different here, you know? And maybe even the best paintings you don't even notice, you just kind of go, oh, what is it about this painting that makes it so sparkly? So that's a little bit better. I'm going to go back in a little bit of this red and this lilac. Put a little bit more. Make it more a little bit more of this lilac, a little bit more of this red, and use a little bit of my medium that I have down here, and blot my brush a little bit. I don't like to have too much medium on my brush, and I'm just going to thinly go over. There we go. See, there's a lot of variation in brushstroke technique in this, and okay. And that's what kind of makes a painting exciting, you know? when you can kind of look at it and notice all the different ways that we're approaching a painting. I mean, you can use several techniques in a painting and still have it look unified. And I've done that with this so far. Like, that's what I really want to explain to you guys, that you guys can use a lot of different types of techniques. As long as you sort of adhere to the idea that patience is virtue, you know, that you can kind of, you have to build up a painting, and that a painting looks ugly now, but you know, if you keep working on it, that it just won't be ugly forever. I promise. And look, it took about 45 minutes for it to no longer be in that like ugly duck phase, right? It took like, I had to paint the background twice, I had to go over the flower a couple of times, and then suddenly, magically, it's no longer ugly. Okay, I'm gonna use my finger, kind of go over that a little bit. Okay. Okay, there we go. I'm going to go back into this, that flower petal. And then I kind of want to go back to that, like the middle part of the painting. No? Let's do that. That's kind of important. Okay, let's go back to, I mean, you can use the same brush, or you can do what I just did, and I like took it out again, took out a different brush. Let's work on this. Let's work on the middle. Okay, we're going to take the Umber. I'm going to put it over here and add a little bit of white to it. A little bit more Umber. And I'm going to just, we're not going to paint all over what I did, right? You're just going to dot it. And I'm going to do little strokes to denote the little parts. Like, we're just going to suggest it. We're not going to paint every little bit of pollen on this. I'm also going to add a little bit of this red to create like a kind of a pink. Like, that's instinctually what I want to do. You don't have to do that. And that's almost done. I'm going to also, I'm also gonna really go into like making, I'm gonna start forming the little parts of this flower by doing this. I'm also gonna go back into this yellow white and denote where they are, because I wanna go back to them. So yellows are funny, you know? Yellows are kind of a funny color because they tend to be pretty translucent. And sometimes that could be really off-putting, but okay, I'm gonna paint. You see how this is like not like solid yet? I'm gonna leave that alone and we're gonna go back to it. But this part's already drying, so I can go back to this. And sometimes paint still doesn't quite dry fast enough for me. I'm going to keep adding. See, that's kind of nice to use these different yellows. It already looks really different. All right, so something we've been neglecting is the stem that's underneath. So we're getting to the end, guys. It's almost there. I'm gonna go into taking, all right, I'm gonna take some of this Payne's Gray that's up here, and I'm gonna put it right into some of this Hooker's Green. And this paint is still kind of wet, and it's on a wet palette. Something to think about a wet palette is like don't put too much water on the sponge underneath, because I think that's what I did, and that's why my paint's a little bit wet. I was actually really afraid that the paint was going to dry during this class, so I kind of put a little bit too much. So I'm going to just paint in the stem, and then I'm going to just sort of put in, I'm just going to suggest it is not flower anatomically correct, if we can use that. And I'm going to leave that and let that dry, and maybe we'll go over that a couple of more. We'll hopefully go over that. If not, we don't. You can always go over it more too. But it looks pretty cool. I mean, it looks pretty cool for me. I can kind of see it looks pretty cool on camera. And now this part is also dry. I'm going to put this brush away and go back to a different brush. Or you can use the same brush or just clean it. And now I'm going to paint a little bit more of that, a little more of the middle. So I have my yellow white. I'm gonna add a little bit more cadmium to it. Actually, no, I'm just gonna add more white to it. I want it to be whiter. I want it to be whiter, whiter, whiter. And I'm going to, you can also maybe use a smaller brush. Maybe I should be using a smaller brush. I'm gonna go for a smaller brush. So I have also this like round, but you can also, honestly, as I said, you guys can use any brush that makes you comfortable. But because I'm doing some detail work, I'm using this smaller round. Actually, it's not even that, it's not that small. It's like a 2. So maybe you can see it in this area. And I'm gonna pick up some of this warm white and I'm going to dot. Also add a little bit more of this cadmium. I'm gonna dot it. Okay. Yeah, and even this won't look exactly like the example that I first showed you guys. I'm gonna put a little bit of this red in here, and kind of. And this is pretty loose, but I kind of don't want it to be super, super detailed here. Because it's kind of nice, as I said, to have variation within your own painting. Okay, let's bring it in. Add a little bit more of this ochre in here and there. Already getting there, guys. Getting to the end. A little bit more white. I'm going to go over this part a little bit more with that, like, oh, maybe not. That was a little bit too warm. I'm gonna go back and put a little bit more white in there. And go over this a little bit, just to kind of create a little bit more contrast. A little bit more variation, as I said. And go over here. All right, we're getting there. We're getting there, we're getting there. A little bit more lilac. A little bit more medium. I'm going to just brush that in. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more white, and then I'm going to reach the end of this lesson. Just to kind of add a little more highlights. Just to clean up some of these edges. I'm going to add a little bit more white to here. I mean, we can really work on this infinitely, couldn't we? We could really do this forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. I hope you guys don't work on this forever and ever and ever after we're done together. Okay. Okay, let's go over it a little bit more. I'm going to just add a little bit more. Okay. So this is I think that this will be a great place to stop. And you guys, as I said, can always go back. So I really hoped you enjoy this first class of painting together with me, Gigi Chen. I want to see the work that you've done. So if you go down below, you will see a link to the Artist Network website and you can post pictures of the things you've done. So, and don't forget that Artist Network also has a link below where you can download a resource called Acrylic Painting Techniques. And that's free, and you'll learn a little bit more about acrylics beyond just these classes. and so excited that we painted together today, and I really look forward to doing this again with you really soon. So thanks guys, see you next time.